This is, I believe, our 20th published Triple Triad interview, and we're going to start before saying who it is, that you've probably seen from the title, with our bonus question, which is, did you specifically change your name in tournaments so many times to make it harder for me to keep tournament records? Now, I've always, ever since I was able to look at stuff and be aware of them, loved sports and competitive statistics. Right? I was making Excel sheets of basketball stats back in 2010, trying to come up with advanced metrics, think in the direction of win shares and box plus minus, if you're at all familiar with that. This was always something I was really invested in. And I came from chess, which also had scores and ratings and stuff. And I came to Triple Triad, which for the most part didn't really have that kept, but was a game I got to be very, very good at and could explore doing something I really enjoy doing. But I have a beef with our player today because something that made it much, much more difficult is all the people that constantly change their names. And I would often input results by hand and then learn they'd all been wrong and who I'd been saying people faced was wrong and had to redo it. And more recently, I've put in stats in more robust ways where I can learn, someone used to go by this name. It's much easier to fix and connect to the rest of their tournament record. But, it's so frustrating for so long. So I want to say our player today is my greatest enemy. So he replies, let's start with this question. No, that's certainly not the reason, but I've always been very picky with usernames, avatars, and this kind of stuff. I always like a name or find it pretty cool, until I don't sometime later. For everybody wondering what I was going by over the course of my TTA career. Laguna, at least I think I started with that. Zero, that's spelled with an X. There was another player spelled with a Z. As someone who's kept too many spreadsheets on this game, I am very aware of these being different players. Adema, Flare, Apex, Genji. Yes, I just changed it again. And I'm probably even forgetting one or two others, which I had for a short time. Now, I have him in tournament records as Zero, Adema, Flare, Apex, and now Genji. But just Zero, Adema, Flare, and Apex is 4 different tournament names, which I think either gives him the record of most different names or tied for most different names. Certainly, this is a legitimate reason to change their names, and I will always think of him as Flare because that's the name he used when I started. But for this interview, we're going to call this an interview with Genji because that's the name that's currently working for him, and that's okay, and we'll respect that despite the frustration it brings deep into my soul. And now let's get to the Genji interview proper. How would you describe your Triple Triad player style? That's a good question. I wouldn't even say that I have a specific style of playing the game. Over the years, I tried to build some hands I could rely on a daily basis for collecting wins, somewhat successfully, but they mostly consisted of cards I just really like visually. So, in the next interview I'm going to put out, a player mentions he really respects a player for using cards he likes rather than cards that are overpowered together. And I do think finding ways to get cards that appeal to you because it's characters you like, or because it's from a game you like, or because visually they appeal, is a neat way to do parts of hand construction. And I think can lead to fun things that might be more distinct than the hands you'd come up with otherwise, because you're forced to make certain things work together. Also, Flare is one of those accounts with almost 10,000 wins to the same number of losses I have, 2,000 some. And that is a very good job collecting wins. Sorry, I said Flare again. I meant to say Genji. My bad. It's so ingrained in me. I will always call Seto Seto. I cannot think of him as Kurama. Things like that. Who is your most interesting opponent? Phew, I have to really dig into my memories for this one, and the next question as well. Most interesting opponent, I'd say this one goes to Seto. You might wonder why I had just had him come to mind. It's because I was looking down the answers. Every time I had a matchup with him, I could not figure out what his plan was. Usually, after 2 or 3 moves, you kind of know or at least expect what the other cards on their hands could be, but Seto had such an unusual way of creating his hands. So this is clearly thinking in terms of closed hand building. But that's interesting. I remember Deli telling a story of he and Seto tried to hand build together, And it was hard for them to come out with results because they kept having different expectations of what cards would fit with the cards they had chosen. And I think this is very much not a criticism of either of them. I think it is to say this is a complex and varied game, and thus you can have people that come at the perspectives here really, really differently. And Seto is, I think, very obviously one of the more unique players we've ever seen, and of course also spectacularly good. So I like this answer a lot. Who is your toughest opponent? I could name Seto here too, but there are a few players to whom I've lost 95% of my games against. Koner was a pain in the butt to play, honestly. So was D/Gogo. I'm pretty sure I beat the latter only once during an official tournament. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Otherwise, the matchups with him always ended in a tie, or mostly a loss for me. Now, I did actually, I should have brought it up, I forgot. I did find the game that Genji had played against D. I think it was somewhere in the Triad Wars 4 or 5 region. I'm gonna pause the recording and find it. That's the smart way, so you don't have dead time. Hey, we found it. So it was by my count, Flair's second tournament ever. Or Genji's, but I have it listed as Flair. Again, apologies. Genji's second tournament ever. And in the first round, he defeats one of the just all-time early greats in Mafi Josie, who I still have rated somewhere around 30th all-time. In the second round, he beats Necro, who I also had quite highly rated at the time. And in the third round, defeats D or Gogo, and then beats Darkside, different player than Dorf, in the fourth round, and loses in the quarterfinals, because the quarterfinals were round 5 then, while nowadays round 5 is just about the finals, loses to Waltz. Really strong quarterfinals run, obviously. This is very strong opposition, and obviously having to play the extra rounds is really tough. So a really nice win against multiple very strong players. What formation or move type do you like more than other players do? Over the years, I really started to focus on hands with a starter in 5. I think with that opening, you have a multitude of ways to impact or even manipulate the game in your direction. Obviously, against the top players, it's not always going to work that way, but back in the days when TTA was booming and less experienced players joined your game, it was a very effective way to gather 10 to 15 wins a day. Makes sense. What formation or move type do you like less than other players do? The X formation, for sure. Doesn't come up very often, but when it does, especially in close games, the possibility of getting comboed right down to hell is too high for my taste. I think this is one of the most common answers, is people not liking X formations. And I've noticed in kind of, I guess what we'd call the modern game, I'm just seeing X's so much less than I used to back in the day. It has become this very, I think, rare setup that used to be, I mean, I have no idea what percentage to assign it, but it used to be just one of the very common move 5 formations, and I think it's now extremely rare. Maybe not extremely, but quite rare. And I think a lot of the players that stuck around are the players that really don't like the X formation. Favorite way to meet a corner starter, a side starter, a center starter? Corner starters do not really change my game plan, fortunately. I still start my turn in 5. Yeah, usually if your hand's going to be built for a center starter, it's going to be ready to have tools to fight against various corners going in 5, and even if it doesn't, 5 may set you up well enough it doesn't matter. Also, if you're mostly playing closed hand games, right, if they start in 1 and you go in 5, they don't know you didn't set up for 1 of 2 or 4, so they're very unlikely to block those squares, and you can usually target the game such that you only need to have a move in one of them. Side starters are pretty rare, but somewhat tricky. If my current hand allows for it, I counter by taking the exact opposite side spot. For instance, if my opponent starts in 4, I play my card in 6. Center starters are the worst for my game plans because, well, that's my spot. But in most cases, I play my card that would normally go in 5 in a spot where I can combo both sides of the opponent's card and try to go from there. Given that it's your card for 5, right, all your cards are kind of able to play off it to capture stuff, So I do think it makes a lot of sense for it to be the first card you use, because it's the one most likely to be able to set your cards up to play off whatever the opponent started with. Do you have a preferred starter type? Does that change between random and hand games? Does it change between open and closed? As said above, in hand games, open or closed, I start with a card in 5. Currently, I have 12 hands saved in my account, and only 2 of them don't have a 5 starter. In random games, it depends, of course. If the game gave me 4 corner cards, I'll probably use one of them in a fitting corner. Interestingly, when playing random, I end up having 4 or 5 cards being focused on one side quite often, which is an absolute pain to play. Yeah, no one likes those randoms. How do you spend time during the opponent's move? Thinking about specific lines, thinking about general things, spacing out? That depends on where I'm playing at the moment. When I'm at work, I have to, work sometime in between, so I'm not focused 100% on the game. When I'm at home on my tablet, I try to think about my next moves or what my opponent might do next. But to be honest, I'm not particularly good at seeing 3 to 4 moves ahead, which leads to me falling into traps more often than not. What is your proudest triple triad moment? There are a few, actually. First, I never would have thought that I ended up having the currently 22nd most wins in TTA history. That's quite bonkers when you think about how many players this site has had over the past 20 years. Adding the fact that I didn't join TTA right from the start, registered in 2005, I think, that's something I'm quite proud of. Yeah, I said earlier that I had Triad Wars 4 as his second official tournament ever, and Eris is his first, and Eris is Sujiro's tournament. That's 2006. So I only have him on the record playing 2006 tournaments and later. Maybe that started the end of 05. I'm not sure exactly. But I have him on the record as an 06 onwards player, so signing up 05 makes sense. Yeah, missed a couple of years of racking up wins. And given that the site has generally, was most active at the start, those were times when games were very available. Of course, I'm also very proud to sport 4 icons from official tournaments and leagues from way back. Winning Clan League 4 was huge for me, though I didn't exactly carry my team, but that's neither here nor there. Getting to the quarterfinals in Triad Wars 4, Triad Wars 5, and SE Rhinoa 4, I believe, were also amazing accomplishments for me. As stated above, I'm not the greatest player to set traps or plan several moves ahead, which is a huge disadvantage against the elite players, so surviving 3 to 4 rounds in said tourneys was pretty darn nice. Lastly, being mentioned as one of TTA's top 100 players way back in the old forums was humbling. I don't know who paid vid to do so, but whoever it was, I really appreciate it. I mean, I've done more recent top 100 players, and I also have Flair making the top 100 tournament players. We can bring up his 3 runs, because I think the first one was just one of the really impressive quarterfinals runs, given the extra rounds, given the really high level of opposition. So if we go to Triad Wars 4, we can see another quarterfinal run, beating the other Zero, spelled with a Z, in the first round, beating Orion, a ZB player, in the second round, beating Koner in the third round, and then losing to D this time in the quarterfinals. And then in Rhinoa 4, yeah, did get it right, this time under the name Flair, beat Haley Carnasso in the first round, Oren from T3 in the second round, and Anthony in the third, before losing to eventual winner Slash of Time in the quarterfinals. I do think there's a really important difference, and this, I suspect, is exacerbated over time. But between the players that are really good calculators, it's just very hard in open for players who have really good instincts or really good feel for the game to overcome the good calculators, because the good calculators will often be able to sneak out of stuff that they kind of positionally should be in trouble but just barely manage a tie. And that's not going to happen near as much in the reverse when the calculator has gotten the advantage. So I think you start, over the later years, you see some players start winning just more consistently than players did in the early years. Of course, Delial and Seto maintained it, but most of the others didn't, or just never had as high win rates as some of the players do later. And I think a big part of that is just there are a lot more pure calculators that came in the later years. But I also think that we shouldn't undersell those early achievements, because having to play an extra round, as Genji did here, especially in Triad Wars 4, is just so difficult. You know, he had to survive 4 rounds to get to the quarterfinals, to just get to the icon rounds. And a lot of those icons are just ridiculous to achieve. And obviously, the players he beat on the way, beating D, is a player who obviously does hold up throughout different eras. It's just really, really impressive quarterfinals. Should Delial be banned? Yes or absolutely. Who's Delial? Excellent answer. Get him. Should Elemental be abolished? Yes or immediately. Never use them, never will. So yeah, get rid of them. Agreed. What clans will always have a place in your heart? Might sound corny, but all of them I was part of. Though I was a member of several big clans TTA has seen, I always only tried out for those I felt a connection to. It started out with the first German clan, Fallen Angels. Me and a few friends from a German gaming/Final Fantasy forum started this one way back when, and I stuck around longer than we expected. After that, I joined the Divas, led by the legend himself, Kaus Debonair. This was probably the one with the genuinely best atmosphere through all ranks. Not to say that other clans don't have a great chemistry, but Divas felt like home for the time it was around. Next was probably the most successful clan ever, which is still going strong, Brotherhood of Seed. Honestly, my first instinct to join was because that .com simply looks fire on every username, so whoever came up with that, kudos to you. But being a Brotherhood of Seed member for more than a decade now, I can say it truly is a brotherhood of immature, simple-minded dickheads. JK, love you all. Another mention shall go to Triforce, which had, in my book, the most amazing leader of all clans I joined. Shuri was such a sweetheart of a guy back then, and surely still is, whatever he's doing now, always having the clan's interests as number one priority. Shuriken is someone, whenever I talk to people about clan leaders, anyone who is in Triforce always brings him up as just this unbelievably good clan leader. He was mostly fading out while I was joining Triple Triad, and by the time I joined Triforce, he had left as leader and been replaced by Dorf, who I got along with very well, so I was very happy with that, but it meant I never got to experience Shuriken, but so many people speak so highly of him. Honorable mentions go out to Avalanche, Zodiac Braves, and Card Club. I still sport the CC in my name from time to time, but I joined them way past their prime on TTX/TTA. For me, Genji's the reason I keep calling him Flare is because Flare.zb is the name I'm used to seeing for him, because that's what he was sporting in kind of 0809 when I started playing, and it's just really hard for me to get past whatever names people went by then. Player you think is most underrated? I don't think there is any specific player that's underrated right now. Back then, phew. I think Meta and CBX never really got the attention other players did. Both were very tough to play in all kinds of rule sets. It's a real shame. Meta came back for, I want to say, like a month and then disappeared again. It would have been nice to have him around longer because I didn't really overlap with him. And clearly a special player. Who are your top 3 to 5 picks for GOAT? Now we're getting into the juicy stuff. Okay, so my top 5 picks for best players ever. Mind you, I didn't follow official tournaments as much as other people did, and in no particular order. I have flashing lights outside. Green and red. Huh. Red's normally like ambulances, but what's green? Anyway, I shouldn't get distracted. Let's get back to his answer. In no particular order, Seto, Delial, Yojimbo, Was Up, Doc Evil. This is the classic 5. Can't argue with that. When did you start playing, and what was your favorite era, favorite rule sets? I'm pretty sure it was 2005 when I joined TTA, so pretty much at the peak of its powers. And this time was my favorite era as well, because from 2005 to 09-ish, I was extremely active and had the most of my success playing. After that, life began to start interfering with the desire to sit in front of a computer for 10 hours straight. Fair enough. And shortly after, the general activity started to go way down. It's still sad that most of the people from back then will probably never come back, but on the other hand, I was so happy when I saw that Richard started it all up again during COVID. Now, we have the somewhat crowded Discord, and you can actually play a few games per day because there are people online. Favorite rule sets. Level 1 through 10, open or closed, same wall plus wall combo. Good classic set. Level 1 to 2, open or closed, same plus combo. Interesting. Level 2 is a. I should have asked follow up questions. I know I always say that, but I really should have. Level 2 is a pretty unpopular choice, and while I am certainly on the grr, level 2 is bad bandwagon, I'm curious what kind of cards people enjoy using there and why people like it. And level 1 through 9, open or closed, same plus, same wall, plus wall combo. Have you met any other triple triad players in person? Only one, but we've known each other way before TTA, the always beloved Rhinoa. She was my best friend for several years back then, and I visited her once in her hometown. Must have been 2008, I believe. Such a lovely human being. What is your biggest weakness as a player? You can evade the question if you think it's targetable. Well, I'm not particularly good at anything, but as already mentioned, I struggle with anticipating moves way ahead. Also, I'm not great at building an effective hand when the rule set is outside my comfort zone. Otherwise, I'd probably have some more icons in my profile. Is there another question I haven't asked you'd like to answer? Favorite card? My favorite card is probably Zodiac, ID 979. It just looks amazing and is a very nice set of numbers with its 8829. Still haven't figured out a great hand with it, though. Thinking about the kind of 988s, they're usually pleasant hands to get in cards to get in randoms. Like you get like 3898 or something. You're always like, yeah, that's a nice card. That's very usable. I do not see them in hands a ton. You sometimes see them in tournament hands, especially when A's are banned on level 9. But I do think it's a tough card to make fit cleanly into a hand, despite being a really interesting number set and a very powerful card on its own. Yeah, I have sympathy with not finding a natural fit for this. And that's it for Genji. I hope you should definitely have a drinking game. I should put this in like the notes or something for every time I mistakenly call him Flare. But thanks so much for doing this, Genji. And again, Genji is, by my ratings and rankings, has, however I've done it, always been a top 100 tournament player ever. It's cool that we're still getting people trickling back in from the good old days. And Flare has actually Genji, has actually frequently just been my example in conversations of just a clearly above average strong tournament player that this might sound mean, I really don't mean it to, but that like didn't break through to higher heights, but was clearly for 4-ish years a active strong tournament player, as well as clearly a very successful player outside of tournaments. And it's really nice to see players like that back. And thanks so much for doing this interview. I really enjoyed it.